Hello, and you're welcome back to Inside the Autism Classroom with myself, Amanda McGuinness, and my incredible co-host, Moonshore or teacher, Elaine Fitzgerald. And today on episode 4, we're going to be talking about target setting and teaching approaches. So I suppose my question for today to start off with, Elaine, is if I'm a new autism class teacher and I'm thinking about maybe target setting or teaching approaches, is there a place where you should begin, or I suppose what do you recommend?
So for me, people and and I said this I think in the first episode, but that when I'd say, where do we start in the class? And everyone say, just spend time with them, build relations and relax. And I said, yeah, I get that. But I also have to have something ready for them as well for September. So in any class I have ever taught, mainstream or autism class, doesn't matter. I always have a theme, have to have a theme. It's just how I operate, it's how my brain operates. And I think it's just the best way to go. And for my autism class, I would always have picked like high interest themes. So I knew that my gang liked, they liked a bit of outdoors, they liked animals, they liked being out in the garden. So I decided to do all about in the garden and growing for my first theme. And that meant in the first week we were there, I brought in soil, I brought in seeds and little pots, and I introduced language and I mean very gently introduced language of seeds and growing and leaves and all the rest of it, and digging and all that. And I brought in some very safe tools that I had to use, and we potted a few seeds and things like that, and we watched them grow, and most of it got fired out into the lawn. And it makes no difference. um but but we did it, and it was lovely, and we had a little garden checklist. We were going around looking for different things in the garden, and in the we have a beautiful woodland walk around our school, so that was used an awful lot that first month. And I didn't know what I was meant to be doing, but I suppose that's my start, is always a theme. And then what I have is I've actually shared my plans. I know you'll be sharing those resources. And some teachers are very, very funny about sharing plans, but I don't care, and I'm not precious, and I'm not saying they're correct, but I am saying that that's what worked for me. So initially I started using the planning from the whole school. And I know it is best practice to have this whole school planning, but it didn't work for my gang at all, because they kind of need individualized planning. So I have this kind of glance card at the front, and it's my theme, and it says that we're doing this is going to be the theme is garden. This is going to be what we do in literacy. This is going to do numeracy. Da, 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 da. Just gave me a rough idea of where to go, and then I have more detailed planning in the ones after that. My tip for planning as well is always use PowerPoint or Google Slides. Don't ever use Microsoft Word, because if you move one box, it goes off into the abyss and you'll never find it again. Whereas PowerPoint is far easier to manipulate. That's my top tip for any teacher ever. So pick a theme, pick high interest themes if you can. You're trying to hook people in. You're going to draw attention away from, I suppose, away from the fear of learning as well. So you don't really want them to think they're learning. You think, oh well, she put a nice video up today, and that's nice. And that generally, gradually, bit by bit, you add in a little bit more academia if it's appropriate, and if it's appropriate for the child. Obviously not. You're not going to have huge, heaviest emphasis on academics in your classroom unless that's what the child wants. Some kids want more work and more work, and they get it, they want it. So it's each individual child, but a team works for everybody. And then you plan within that team what's best for Bobby, what's best for Amanda, and you make sure that you have that all set out so that you're covering your curriculum, but in a very gentle, appropriate, regulation first approach. So and it's very much like a UDL approach. I'm sure you are familiar, Amanda. I don't need to tell you about Universal Design for Learning, but anyone that's not, it's basically like if you can provide as many ways as possible for people to learn, and to also to show their learning, and to be assessed in a way, then everyone can learn. Whereas if you only have one kind of track approach, it can be very, I suppose, stressful for some kids as well. So for me, it's about providing lots of different options for learning. So my gang love videos, so I will use an awful lot of videos when it comes to talking about different language and introducing songs, etc. They like cutting and sticking activities. They do really well too. So that's an approach. Whereas if I just went for chalk and talk and writing and everything, that would rule out straight away, would take a load of children out of the equation, and they wouldn't get to learn anything. So yeah, so that is like I do an awful lot of, I use ChatGPT a lot for giving me ideas for a theme. So like, it's amazing if you pop into ChatGPT about, give me thematic plans for a senior autism class in a neuroaffirmative lens, just popping it in, straight away. Just make sure you're not getting in anything about compliance or any of that stuff that we don't want anymore. That it just gives you ideas. And as my wonderful colleague Fiona Jennings says, it's like a really good colleague that you can just ask advice for. Like, any idea what I might do for that? And then it throws up all the different ideas. Then you filter out what you want. And you say, oh God, that's actually, I never would have thought of that in a month of Sundays. So it really has a very specific role like that. Super. So that'd be like I suppose that's the actual planning of academia. They're all your curricular targets. And then you're going to have your student support plans, and they are I suppose your targets in terms of language and emotional development, and maybe I suppose social development where that's appropriate. And they're a different chestnut, as they say. It's kind of, again, Fiona, I always go back to Fiona, she's just amazing. And she would always say, when you're trying to figure out, because it can be very broad, where do I start? What target? How do I nail down 3 or 4 targets for this child when there's loads of things I could be working on, and you can get quite overwhelmed at times. But Fiona would say, pick a few things that are the barrier. What's the barrier to the child's learning? Or what's the barrier to the child's progress? And they're the things you pick at. And then you'll have your kind of your overall target between October and February. And then within October to February, you've got your sub targets. So from now to February, you might want the child to, I suppose, to be able to express no in a situation that they're uncomfortable. That's a really important thing. We want autistic learners, and we want children with minimal speech. We want them to be able to say no that's really important, that they can protect themselves and advocate for themselves. So I'm picking a wild one now anyway. That was in my head, but that you'd have a huge build up to that. You're not just starting on no between October and February. You've got like stories about it. You've got social narratives around it. You've got little matching activities. Yes and no. There's a huge build up to that. So just make sure that when you do pick your targets for that child, that you've also got a list of sub targets within that to get you to that point as well. I think that's an awful lot.
That's amazing. Lots of different things I was thinking about when you were talking there. One of the key things I was thinking about is autistic cognition, when you were talking about like gently introducing the theme and then kind of generalizing out again, broadening out the perspective. So for anyone listening, monotropism is I suppose, I won't say the absolute, but I'll say the predominant way that many autistic people will, I suppose, focus their attention and go into what's called a flow state. So the way that you've even introduced the concept of themes, I was just being like, I don't say like tick, 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 but I was like, agree, hard agree, absolutely agree. But then also again, to shift out the focus again, to not just learn, this is because autistic people can also be episodic in how they process, so that we can also broaden out the perspective again. So we're not just learning no in this context, you're teaching to generalize out. So by bringing all of the different subways of learning no in different contexts and different ways to teach it, and to kind of build up that associative thinking, that was just amazing. So hard agree for myself here in Bal in Mayo. So I suppose my next question then around, I suppose you've talked a little bit about planning then, and maybe the SSP. I suppose, let me think, if we're thinking then, okay, we talked about teaching approaches and UDL. Are there any resources? Now I know obviously the NCSE have loads of incredible recommendations. Are there any practical tools, resources that, say if a person went out to the likes of Outside the Box Learning Resources or another educational stores, or anything that you would recommend? Or maybe some people, I can see over my shoulder if you're watching the video format of the podcast, I do love a book. I'm a person that loves to have a book or something I can read through. Is there anything that you found that helped you maybe at the start or even now?
I found that I suppose I know storybooks are a lovely way of teaching any theme. There's just the amount of gorgeous. So there's loads of lovely storybooks about autistic learners and about autism and everything, and we have all those always present in the classroom. But then there are some lovely ones that are just about the theme itself, and it's a nice, gentle way. Like we have story time every day, and then as well, sometimes the physical book can be lovely. And then sometimes you have kids who are drawn towards ICT, which some of my kids are. Then we've got like Epic Reader is super. So we have our Epic, and you can type in any topic at all. If you're doing about bees, you just put in bees, and it has a little read to me section, and it reads it for the kids, and they sit and they listen to it before they go on the bus. And it's just that nice kind of relaxing, I suppose, a moment in the day, but they do take it in. And it's funny, you know, the one man in particular will sit and he's looking anywhere but the book. He's not looking at the book at all. But then the following day he'll tell you about it. You know, he'll mention words and language from it. It's like you don't have to be staring at something to soak it in. So things like that. And to be honest, my most utilized teaching approach, and if there's anything I could recommend for any child ever in any class, is just play, play, play. Is teaching through play and teaching through fun. And, you know, we've been trying to teach certain language with one of the boys in this class, and we've discovered that he just loves like playground games. So and we do, what time is it, Mr. Wolf? And he will now say, he'll gather us all, he'll push the tables out of the way, and he'll gather us all and he'll make us all hold hands. You know, you have to be very close and work so closely um in the autism class. And one of the teaching approaches is that yourself and the SNAs are a team, and you have to model everything, and you have to get stuck in everything, and nobody can be too precious, and no one can say, oh God, you know, I feel a bit silly. But that's why the SNAs are just amazing, that they just, the amount of times myself and the SNAs have stood there holding hands, the three of us, people passing the window going, what are these three at? But he is buzzing and he wants us to do what I was Mr. Wolf, and by God, we're going to do it. And you know, and then somebody else will go up and do the wolf. And you're marching along, and he'll say, you know, it's 3 o'clock, and then he'll say 1, 2, 3, and his counting has come on so much, and his numbers have come on so much, and you know, to the world it looks ridiculous what we're at, but actually what we're doing is we're teaching language, we're teaching waiting your turn, we're teaching, you know what I mean, there's loads of lovely things going on. But yeah, so teaching approaches would be to get to model and model and model. Like again, I'm going to go back to the SNAs, who are just phenomenal women altogether. The amount of times that they have modeled, you know, running into the toilet when you need to go. I've done it myself. They'll say, "Oh, Miss Fitzgerald, it's time for the toilet." I'm like, "Okay, I'm going to go to the toilet now." I run in, or they do it, or they'll say, "Oh, now first I'm going to sit down, and then I'm going to cut this out." And you see the kids kind of looking at us, and it could take weeks and weeks and weeks. And you have to be so patient, because they need to do it in their own time. They're not on our schedule. Much, you know, as we can provide all the schedules in the world, they need to wait until they're ready. So, you know, teaching approaches that I would have used in the mainstream, not so much. They're kind of, you know, they have their place, but really it's play, patience, modeling from the adult's point of view, and just accepting them expressing how they learn in their own way. Could be on an iPad. You know, I saw one day we were doing a theme about the Arctic, and about, you know what I mean, and we were doing about penguins and everything. And then one of the boys had set up this gorgeous thing in the tough tray, and he had all the animals, the Arctic animals, and he got blue paint and he sprayed the paint into the tough tray, and he was making his Arctic thing. So I just sat beside him and I was like, don't annoy him now, just sit close enough, so, you know, just don't spook him. So, oh, I like this, you know. And then eventually I said, this is and he was like, penguin. Don't, you know, this is very early days in the class. So he wasn't talking an awful lot at the time, but this was the first time we'd heard him using the language from the theme. But this could be week 3, you know. So your teaching approaches are really, they're different, and they are, you have to kind of unlearn some of the stuff from mainstream a little bit to embrace it and take your time. You know, it's a marathon, not a sprint sort of thing. But if you have there's a good gang of a team in that classroom, and you're working together, and you're willing to make absolute idiots of yourself, you're onto a winner straight away. And it's also a bit of crack. The kids need fun. They keep the children, they just need a bit of fun in the classroom. They need someone who's going to have fun with them and laugh and be silly and give them the school experience that every child deserves. So, and by God, you know, we don't do everything perfectly. We have a lot that I'd love to do differently, love to do better. But the kids in my class, between myself and the two SNAs, they got some amount of laughs and some amount of fun and giggles in the last 2 years. And I can say that with hand on heart.
That's amazing. And that again leads me back into thinking about like neuroaffirmative practice, like what you've referenced there, felt safety, nervous system. I suppose you're trying to make sure you're not activating anyone. You want to have that felt safety. Like when you went over beside the pupil, you sat beside them, you let them like feel like, oh, this is safe. And then you're like, oh, that is. And then there was no like expectation. They were able to say if they'd like to say. And even the piece around the passionate interest, I was listening to you with like my heart was like, oh, it's amazing. The piece around the student that had a real strong interest with is it schoolyard games and kind of, you know, activities.
Yeah.
Like that's exactly when people say about, let's not use a person's passionate interest or a focused interest. It's not that we're using, we want to support them and show them that we value that interest too. And obviously we tread carefully, and you so have, but it's great to see that you're thinking the way that I would think myself as an autistic person. I'd be like, well, have we thought about it this way? Like I know you don't like praise, but honestly, you're doing everything so phenomenally. I don't have a hat, my forehead's too big, but if I did, my hat would be off to you and I'd be like, amazing. I suppose I was thinking something there that you said there about the student support plan. If you're collaborating with parents, and I can only give like the lens of the parent reading the student support plans, and I have found the ones that and I'll say this now, this is just my own perspective, could be the only one ever in Ireland that ever thought this way. I love when I've had the opportunity. Obviously, there's an expectation the parent would give some feedback on the target setting, but I would just maybe recommend to any of the practitioners listening, or the teachers, or even leadership listening as well, just think about the wording of the student support plans, because remember, the parents that you're supporting, like myself, or parents that are long time on the road like myself, or maybe newly parents, we're carrying an awful lot of experiences that we might not be telling you about. We're not teachers and not SNAs, not schools, but out in the community where people have maybe looked down upon our children, said some not great things. Maybe we've had, sometimes it can be within a family, unexpectedly, someone might unexpectedly say or do something, or often when you have a child that has a disability, not on purpose, but sometimes there's an expectation of less, not by school or school staff or anything like that. So I think it's really important. Or if there's a child, say with a PDA profile, I have two sons with a PDA profile, sometimes unintentionally, or sometimes maybe intentionally, I don't know, out in the community, people might see my boys as misbehaving or this, that, and the other. So I think it's to be really aware of the wording that you use in all of the planning documents that parent read, even though it's all neutral, you're trying to support the student, but to be really aware of every single word that goes into those documents, because it's like an antenna goes up for me if I'm reading something and go, oh, hold on, even though there was never anything meant within the document. Do you think it's important in terms of target setting and collaborating, that kind of maybe leads into what we were saying in episode 3, that we think about that impact on even though we're just being like, okay, this is what I need to put in here, we need to be maybe a little bit aware of the impact on the parent of the words that we're choosing to whatever we're putting in the documentation.
To be honest, any documents that you put together, I always say you need to write it as if the parent's going to read it tomorrow. That's I am a mum of two. I would be devastated if I read something that was written in a really negative light about my child. Like, at the end of the day, we're all mums and dads and we all love our babies. And I would never, we have to be real about things and we have to be honest. And, but that doesn't mean we have to be negative. This comes back to, I suppose, the last episode where I said, if you look at things in a positive light and try and give as much of a strengths-based approach as possible, focus on that. And I think that's where you have to collaborate with the parents. I know in the first episode we spoke about sending out kind of a survey to parents about what you want to work on. What are your, I always put in, I think I put in, now the parents are going to listen to this so they can correct me, something about, academic goals for your child this year, and I suppose more social, emotional, non-academic goals maybe is what I've said in it. So I get an idea of where you want to go on both ends, because that's really important. Now, people have asked me before about, do you put in curricular academic goals into your SSP? You can, but actually you can reach those targets through your planning, through your fortnightly plans. So that's up to you. But I would say I kind of keep my SSP for non-academic targets, and I keep my fortnightly planning, my academic planning for the academic planning, if that makes sense. But so getting a sense of parents initially at the start of the year, what is it that you think you might want to work on? Is there anything that you have in mind? And then using all of that information to create your profile and your student support plan. And I think that the new format of student support plan is great in that you have your profile where you go into everything with, Bobby does this, how's Bobby's fine motor, and you have a really, really strong detailed analysis of the child's actual profile. And then from that, you're going to take all the strengths, you want to list all the strengths, and then you're supposed to list all of the areas of support. And then from that, then you're going to highlight some priority areas of support, and they are going to be your focus for your SSP. So that is, again, I think that's available online anyway, the new SSP. But if not, we'll make sure I can share that anyway. I have a template of it, and I think I got that from St. Angela's when I was doing the postgrad. So I'm just finished now, thankfully. I did 2 years of it, but they had all the most up-to-date, I suppose, documents and everything, which was super. And they went through it in great detail with us, and we had to do assignments and everything on it. So it's just a great start to it. But that collaboration with parents is so important. And if there is something that's, in the same way that we need their input to create the targets, we also need their input to implement the target. because if there is something that you're working on, it needs to be, if you do want to generalize it for life, we want them to be saying no in school and no in at home, and using it in the correct context. And, I suppose parents are gently assessing it at home too. So they need to let us know how that's going and things like that. So, parents are needed on both ends for both of that. So that's what works really well for me anyway.
Absolutely. Again, it goes back to, I suppose, what we focused on in episode 2. It's that collaboration piece again, taking on each other's perspective and trying to support the incredible children in the setting. So listen, Elaine, thank you so much for, again, all of your incredible information and insights. And obviously today we focused on target setting and teaching approaches. And tomorrow for episode 5, we're going to focus on training, education and resource recommendations. So I suppose it's goodbye for myself and the brilliant Elaine. So thank you.